So I've been writing since I was a kid. Ever since I could hold a pencil or a pen, I've been writing. And over the years, I collected a bunch of short stories, and they were fun to do. And finally, when Amazon and Kindle started becoming really popular in around 2012 for me, I decided I was going to try my hand at self-publishing. And I put up Bits of Bone, which is a collection, like I said, of some short stories. And I made a lot of rookie mistakes with that book. Mainly, I didn't really seek any kind of help. I didn't look for any professional editing. I kind of gave it to a few friends. I did it on my own. I slapped a cover on it, which is actually my silhouette or my shadow in the basement holding an axe with a spotlight behind me. And I threw it up on Amazon, and it did okay, but I realized it wasn't professional quality, and I didn't want to keep it up in the world, so I ended up taking it down. But I think I probably will revisit some of those stories in the future because I really did like them, but they just were poorly executed.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Horror Business Episode 9. Today we have splatterpunk generally, but overall horror author Daniel Volpe with us, and we're gonna be taking it through his journey as an author, all of his books, even starting out with ones that are no longer available and taking us to where we are right now, which is the most talked about book, I think, in the Books of Horror Facebook group. So let's get started with just when did you start publishing, and what were I know that you had one out in 2012, but can you describe like what happened after that as well?
So my first major novella, we'll call it, release that I did was Billy Silver, and that came out in the very end of 2020, and that was actually I kind of wrote that as not so much of a joke, but it was a something one of my coworkers and I talked about. We both love extreme horror and Edward Lee and stuff, and I had always kind of done more traditional horror, and mainly because I was afraid my mother was going to read it. So I was like, I don't want to put anything too crazy in here because if my mom reads it, she's going to think I'm a weirdo and deviant, which she probably already knew because she's my mother. So I was like, you know what? I'm like, screw it. I was like, I'm just going to write something, and it's going to be gross. It's going to be violent, and we'll see what happens with it. So I sat down and I knocked out Billy Silver within probably a week or two. It's only 26,000 words. And I gave it to my buddy Rich, and I was like, hey, take a look at this. What do you think? And he's like, it's pretty good. And I'm like, all right, and we'll see. So I let it sit for a while, and then I ended up hiring an editor because I was like, I want to shop it around and see if anybody is if they're willing to pick this up. So I did, and I sent it around, and I got a ton of rejections or no responses. So I'm like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to publish it myself. I slapped a terrible cover on it, which was the original red and black cover, which was actually a piece of rust that I just threw some filters on it and put it up. And it was born. And then after a while, some people were like, hey, that cover is kind of shitty. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I'm gonna hire a pro. I'm gonna get a real cover on it. And so the new cover that is on it now was done by Michael Squid, he also did the cover of Talia, and that's the newest iteration of Billy Silver. And that was kind of where I started. November of 2020 is when it all kind of took off for me.
And so what happened? How did you, even Billy Silver with the original cover, how did you get that out there?
So I love the Splatter Club page, which obviously I'm sure you guys are very familiar with. And I never really knew something like that existed. And I kind of found this page, and I'm like, oh wow, these are my people. Like these are like kindred spirits. And so I started just reading the recommendations when we were doing the book club. I was trying to read the book club, book of the month. And I really just started interacting with everyone. I didn't say anything about writing. I didn't say anything about, hey, I have a book coming out. It was more of just an interaction with people that were like-minded. And I started really reviewing when I'd see somebody wrote something. I'm a pretty fast reader as well as a fast writer. So when I would start reading stuff, I would just screenshot like my Goodreads or my Amazon review and just throw it up. And if the author was in the group, I tagged them, and that was it. And then after a while, people start seeing my name consistently, supporting everyone else. And then I think that when my book came out, enough people knew, and that when it went live, people were willing to kind of reciprocate and take a look at it, and then it started getting a little traction, and then a little bit more, and so on and so forth.
Awesome. And so was that? And did you put any money into advertising, or was this just word of mouth?
No, it was all word of mouth. Like now, I'm starting to kind of learn the advertising game, and how to use certain social media platforms. But this was just word of mouth, and man, it was just. I don't think I even had Instagram at the time. I think it was just Facebook posts. So that was it, word of mouth.
I'm trying to remember because, like I said, from about I feel like May of 2020 and on, my brain became mush. I didn't know when the seasons were changing. I was stuck inside because of my job was teaching. Everything was online. But at what point, if you even remember, since everything has gone so busy for you too, were you did the book of the month with the Splatter Club, right? Was that pretty cool to be like you had been joining with other people to read theirs, and then suddenly you got to host one? And did that help at all, or was that just kind of more hanging out with friends? How was that?
I definitely think it helped because I'm interactive, and I think like everybody, like I'm attached to my cell phone, and my wife and kids always joke because I'm always on my phone and stuff, and they know that when they hear like the Facebook ding, like the private message, like, oh, are you selling a book? Are you selling a book? I'm like, I don't know, I gotta see. So I'm very interactive with people, and I think that readers appreciate that. When they had a question, it didn't sit waiting unread for 3 days. I was generally, if I could, I would try to answer it immediately. And if they had anything that was like spoilery, I was like, hey, just send me a private message. I don't have any problems talking to you. And I think that people saw that I was willing to go out and be personable, and it kind of helped build it a little bit.
Okay. I think that's huge because we haven't done a book a month in a while. It's been a crazy holiday. Like that's usually the easy thing everyone says. If someone's out there and really wants to help run and collect authors and help run it, please contact me because I'd love to do another book of the month. But I want to also give authors, when I kind of reach out to them, something to like a model. And so sometimes I'll send a link to it. And yours was a really good one. And I think that's true, is because you're interacting. Out of curiosity, it sounded like your family made it a bit of a tease, like, oh, you're getting another message selling a book. Some authors feel like overwhelmed when that ding comes and they start getting the attention right away. It's one thing to say, I want to sell a lot of books and I want to be popular. But suddenly when people start to share your stuff around and you see your name everywhere and those dings are coming up, there's a bit of anxiety. At least I know myself sometimes feel it. Other authors do. How were you able to run with that and use it as a positive stressor rather than a negative stressor? If that question makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I am not like, unfortunately, I know a lot of people are very like kind of introverted. I'm not. I'm kind of like an extrovert. I don't mind talking. Public speaking doesn't scare me. I can stand up in front of a crowd of 1,000 and talk. It doesn't bother me. So when people were asking me questions online or on my cell phone or like that, it really wasn't bothersome, and it was more of kind of like a humbling experience. I'm like, I can't believe people want to talk to me. And so if they're going out of the way to take their time to message me, I don't have any problem, shooting them a message back or answering them as quickly as I can. Obviously, sometimes life gets in the way, but I always try to answer everyone. Sometimes Facebook with the algorithms hides things, and I won't see a post for like 2 days, and all of a sudden I'm scrolling, and then I see something that they tagged me in, and I'm like, oh, damn, I forgot, I didn't even see this. So, it wasn't really a fearful thing. It was more of like, I just wanted to make sure I got to everyone. I didn't want to feel everybody to feel left out, that, I was ignoring them or there was some kind of personal issue.
I've got a quick question before we go forward from Billy Silver's. I want to go back because you first put out your book of short stories in 2012 and then nothing else until 2020. What happened in the interim? Were you still writing during that time?
I was, but I wasn't as serious. And shockingly, I think I've said this before on other podcasts, I'm a big like fantasy sci-fi kind of nerd, and I love that stuff. And that was some of the first stuff I wrote when I was a kid. I have like 2 full-length steampunk novels that I wrote, and wow. I have a fantasy novel that's like at like 60K, and they're god awful. They're just so bad. But I had a good time writing them. I got a lot of experience writing them. So in that time frame, I wrote a lot of fantasy, steampunk, and not really sci-fi. I did write some horror in there, but I had a really difficult time writing long horror. I always kind of found like I couldn't get past like that 6,000 word mark until Billy Silver, at least in horror. But everything else, I was like, oh, I could write for days for, Steam and wizards and shit. And that wasn't a problem. But horror gave me an issue.
Will we see that crossover one day? Some fantasy horror, some sci-fi horror, more of that from you?
That's a possibility. I wouldn't doubt it, because I really do. I mean, my bookshelf is full of, Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering and Forgotten Realms and all that stuff. So Wizards of the Coast.
Very good.
I haven't seen any like extreme wizard horror. I think you can do it. Like, why not?
Yeah. I mean, you get like there's a subgenre of fantasy called grimdark. Joe Abercrombie's a big one on it, and Glenn Cook, like the Black Company. It's really violent, dark horror or dark fantasy, but it's not really horror. It's just really violent fantasy. So you might see something in the future.
I have seen. I haven't seen. I've heard, because one of our acquisition editors way back picked up a manuscript called Bleak Warrior, and they were calling it what was the genre? They were sword and debauchery instead of sword and sorcery. So it was sword and debauchery because it's like you said, it was like a Dungeons and Dragons, but on steroids, where it's just this violent, hyper violence. So fascinating. I'll have to check that out. It would be interesting.
That's cool.
It sounds like all that practice writing these epics actually helped you get from 6,000 to 26,000 words.
Yeah, that it really did, because then I started outlining, and with horror I was never a big outliner. I would always kind of pants my horror stories, because I'm like, oh, I just want to make it short and violent and gross and brutal. And then after a while, I'm like, man, if I really start outlining, I might be able to expand this. And once I started doing that, and I had an outline for my books, it's been like sky's the limit. Like once I have that done, then I pretty much just won't stop until I'm done writing the book. So it's always nice to know where I'm going, and that outlining is definitely, made my writing jump through the roof.
So what happened after Billy Silver?
So Billy Silver, I wrote in March of 2020, and like I said, I tried to shop it around a little bit. I finished it quickly. I got it edited, and I tried to shop it around, and I got knocked down. But after I wrote that book, I was like, man, I really like writing this extreme horror, splatterpunky kind of stuff. And I think actually what's funny is directly after that, I wrote Left to You, and which is the complete polar opposite of Billy Silver. It's a very serious book. Obviously there's some supernatural elements to it, but it's very serious. It's dealing with the Holocaust and cancer and, just some really dark imagery. So I went from Billy Silver, and then I tried my hands at writing a full-length novel, which was Left to You, which is about 73,000 words. And again, I wrote that book in like 2 months. And once I finished that, I'm like, all right, this was enough of the seriousness. I want to go back to the filth, the sex, the violence. And I wrote Awakened in Blood right after that. And that was my second published work. And that is like, I'm sure like most of the listeners love like 80s horror. That's like my throwback to 80s horror. Like it's just full of really gross sex and violence. And I was like, I'm just gonna write something fun and nasty, and I did. So after I finished that one up, Billy Silver starting to gain some traction, and people are asking me about Talia, who's a character in Billy Silver, and like, we really want to know more about this character. Do you have plans on doing a story on her? And I'm like, no, not really. And it kept coming on and on. People were like, you should really do something. So I'm like, you know what? I think I'm gonna. And I gave her a little bit of a backstory, and I did an outline. And I'm like, oh, I kind of like this. And same thing. I flew through that in probably 3-4 weeks, and I wrote that entire book. And then ever since then, everything else has kind of been just flowing well.
So Awakened in Blood, like how did that one do? Did you have the readers from Billy Silver that all went to that one as well? Did you pick up a lot of new readers with that?
I think the problem what happened with that book is because I wanted to get Talia out quickly, because I wanted people to read it, and I was kind of hoping that I could get enough traction with it if it was out early in the year that maybe I could pick up a Splatterpunk nomination, and I did, so it worked out in my favor in that aspect. So Awakened in Blood, kind of feel got lost in the mix because that came out in March of 21 because I had some issues with my editor at the time. And I wanted to get it out earlier in January, but it got kind of held up. And Talia came out at the very end of April. So there was only like a month and a half, maybe 2 month lag time in between them. So people were reading Awakened in Blood, but not as many as I had hoped. That book surprisingly was picked up by 2 international publishers, it's actually one of not my least popular book, but it wasn't one that got a lot of reads, and it got signed by 2 overseas publishers, so I was pretty happy with that as well.
How did that happen?
That's actually really crazy. Like I just got approached, like I just got emails and private messages from people, and like, oh, I'm so and so from this publisher. I'm interested in your book, and I'm like, do you have the right email address? Like, you know who you're talking to, right? Like, are you sure you want to pay me to publish my thing in another language? And yeah, those were weird. It was just like an organic thing that they just kind of approached me. And again, I think it goes back to my presence on social media because I am out there a lot, and they're seeing these covers and my name, shared, and not just by me, but by others. And I think they see that, and then they decided to just reach out and see. I have another deal in the works right now with an Italian publisher for a book. So, and it was the same way. I got an email randomly just asking if I was interested. So I don't know. I have no tips on that. It was just luck of the draw, I guess.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I think they look at that stuff too. I'm pretty positive they're looking in the same groups and stuff like that for English talent. And when they see it over and over again, the same covers, they just approach people, and that's fantastic. So you did exactly what it is. You got noticed by these people. That's perfect. And I'm curious, since you are so active on the social media, then since you self-publish, you know all the back behind like going KDP and stuff like that. Do you do better on, say, those platforms like KDP and maybe Drafted Digital or whatever you publish through? Or is it selling to fans individually who want something personalized? And it looked like you made some kind of bundles with a lot of goodies in them and stuff that you did with Aaron Beauregard. Is that stuff, which is better for you as an author?
I love selling direct to people because you really get a good personal interaction, and I've had a lot of good conversations with readers. I've become friends with readers. I mean, everybody knows Donna Latham on Books of Horror in every group.
Yeah.
She literally, she came out to Atlantic City to see Aaron and I, and she's just a fan and a reader, and she's so sweet. And that never would have happened if I didn't make that personal connection from selling signed copies. So I really enjoy that. And the bundles, they do cost a little bit of money, but I like to throw stuff in there for the readers that are going out of their way to pay that extra shipping because unfortunately, I'm not Amazon. I can't offer free shipping, but I kind of like to make it worth their while. I don't really upcharge it too much. I charge them for pretty much the packaging and the shipping, and I throw some little goodies in there just to make it, just to make it worth it for them, make them feel like they're getting something that nobody else can get. And I really enjoy that. And sometimes it's it is work, especially when I do a book release and I'm shipping out 50 to 100 copies of books. But it's fun. My kids help me. They're down here, and we have like a little assembly line set up, and they know how to do things. And they're getting everything set up, and they're carrying stuff upstairs, so it's fun. But KDP and Amazon is great. It's nice to see the royalties coming in. But if I could choose one or the other, I definitely would choose just to sell privately to people. So
after that, so talk more about Talia, because Talia is one that I've seen everywhere as well.
Yeah, that one is a bit rough. Like it's got some really graphic violence and some really graphic sex in it, but that book actually resonates a lot, I feel, with female readers. And I've been told that I write women well, and I don't really know how to do it or why. I just kind of make them, what I see. Like I live in a house with 3 women and a female dog, and I grew up with, a mother and a sister and stuff. So I just kind of wrote them as I see them, and not try to make them like objectified, but just make them as the people that they are. And Talia, I wanted her to be like this strong character, but still with human flaws. And then towards the second half of the book, when things start going haywire, she kind of comes back for that, the coup de grace, and she kicks some serious ass, and I love her. I love the character. I love everything about her. And obviously you'll definitely be seeing more of her in the future.
Cool.
Nice.
So how did that one go? Like, talk about like how that one was that one shared in the groups and everything as well? Was it getting people to go back and read Billy Silver?
Yeah, so when I kind of like to tease people with stuff, so I remember the post I actually put the night I sat down to write it. I put my cover page, Talia in big letters by Daniel J. Volpe, and I took a picture on my cell phone and I put it up on Facebook, and I said, "You guys made me do this, and get ready for it." So already I was trying to start building that little bit of hype, and like I said, I write quickly. And Talia, I think most of my books are around 40,000 words. I can write that in a month easily. Some maybe 2 months depending, but 40K I can bang out in a month. And so I knew that giving them that little bit of a tease was going to put them on edge, looking forward to it. And I wrote that book, and I just started kind of, once I got the cover in, I put out the cover images, so people are already starting to get hyped up with that. And then once the book was ready to be published, again, I didn't really buy any ads. I kind of just did word of mouth, sharing the cover when I could, and other people would take it and run with it and share the cover. And once the book was published, again, I just ordered a ton of copies, had them on standby for people if they wanted signed ones, and it just kind of grew. And the same thing, like books of horror, people would buy it and they would just share it. And that cover it's a pretty cool cover. I'm not gonna lie. So
Yeah.
it's eye catching. So when people see it, they're like, "Oh, what is this?" And they click on it, and they sometimes they read it, sometimes they don't. And so yeah, it's grown on its own pretty much.
I wanted to ask, do you have, now that you're a couple books in, do you have any sort of like ARC team where or beta readers or reviewers that you automatically send to, kind of like your own personal street team, or is it more just the teasing on social media as it builds up to the release?
So the next book I have coming out will be through D&T Publishing. So Dawn over at D&T, she has her own kind of like street team and ARC readers and stuff like that. So she's really great with that, and she kind of handles everything on that end for me. I don't mind beta readers, and I would use them from time to time. But for me, I don't want somebody to try to change the story. And Dawn is great with that. Like, she just kind of leaves it as it is. The story is the story. Obviously if there's errors, and yes, I want to know about that, but she takes care of all of that stuff with the street team and getting it out there.
I wanted to follow up on that one. Are you ever planning on going back to self-publishing?
I might do some self-published stuff, but right now it's kind of I like working with Dawn, and it's a time thing. I'm not very computer savvy, so for me to do all this stuff that she's doing for me, it doesn't really make too much sense. I might end up putting out a short story collection in 23 when my contracts expire for some of the ones that came out in 21 and 22. I'll probably try my hand at self-publishing that. But for right now, I have a book with Death's Head coming out in May, and they're obviously handling all that, and then my stuff with D&T. So I'd rather just spend my time writing than trying to figure out the computer stuff.
Cool. That makes sense. I kind of wanted to ask then, since you said, I guess, when you were doing all your fantasy stuff, you learned how to do the outlining. You pretty much have the book set in your mind, and almost everything's drafted out by the time you first do that tease. Is that correct? You're saying?
Yeah, for the most. I don't start
Okay.
writing a book until I know the ending of it. Till my outline is done, I don't start it.
All right. Because we had this episode with Drew last time, which I know you had enjoyed, and we were making a big point of like, hey, authors, stop telling any of your ideas, or sometimes they'll just shoot out a title like, you asked for this story, but then they don't actually have it set in their head. So I was just wanted to reiterate that as someone who's finding success, they've got it all done, they've mapped it out, and they're only sharing when they're positive you're going through with this book. So awesome.
Yeah, a lot of the times I won't even share that stuff until I start writing it, and maybe I'm a couple thousand words in, and I'm like, all right, the story's gelling. I'm really liking where we're going with this. I'm gonna see this through to the end. So, I will then, maybe I'll share a teaser, like my sequel to A Gift of Death, Black Hearts and Red Teeth, which is coming out from D&T Publishing. I knew that, I knew it was done in my head. I've had that story in my head for a while, and once I finally outlined it, I'm like, oh, this is gonna kick ass. I'm like, I have to write this. So I told Dawn, I'm like, hey, this is going to be ready shortly. Just be ready for it. And this is the title. And she's like, I love it. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to share it because I like it. And it's going to be done shortly, so I'm not too concerned.
Awesome. Okay. Is that okay? Because you do write very fast. Just out of curiosity, because I know a couple of authors and I'm always blown away by it, and you're sounding like one of them now because the way you're cranking these out. Um, the speed. How much do you write in a day? Then maybe do you go by like a daily word count? Do you set what are kind of your goals if other authors, not to compare, but just an idea of what it is you do each day for your,
So
writing ritual, as it were.
I try to keep things fairly consistent. Like I'm an early riser. Like I get up at 5 on Monday through Friday, and I take care of the dogs, and then I sit down and I write until I have to go to work. So generally speaking, I only write for about 45 minutes to an hour a day, if that, and I can generally get between 1,000 and 1,500 words in that time frame. But I do it 5 days a week. You know, as much as I can stick to that, I will. Like today, I had a little bit of downtime and I was able to sit on a computer and work on some things, and I knocked out like 2,700 words today. And normally I don't write on the weekends, so the weekends are like a bonus for me if I do write on the weekends. So I try to do around, if I can get 5,000 words a week, I'm happy. And that's just like casual writing. If I have a deadline, when Aaron and I wrote So Sorry, my portion of So Sorry, I actually got sick when I was trying to write it, and I couldn't write. Like I was just out of it. I could not do it. And we had a deadline to meet because we wanted to get it out at a certain time. So I ended up sitting down and powering through it and writing like, 3,000 to 4,000 words a day. A Gift of Death, I wrote the last 7,000 words in one shot. I sat down all day and just sat at the computer and didn't leave till it was done. So I always have a ritual. Get up in the morning. I drink black coffee and I stare at the computer and I write. So
That's super encouraging. I appreciate that, because I think so many times authors feel like if they can't devote 4 hours or something like that, they just can't get into it. But you're saying 45 minutes a day. It's like that, those couple, just a couple whacks a day, and before you know it, the tree falls and you have this book. So that's excellent.
yeah.
What you brought up with Aaron, I want Lucy to ask any more questions about this that you might have, but I'm curious about collaborations, how that kind of works. But Lucy, I'll throw it back to you.
No, go for that one. I'm
Okay.
just going back. I like these like tangents because then we're not just in my like chronology of Gift of Death.
Yeah.
Talk about that next.
Yeah, well then I'm always fascinated because I've gotten to work with a couple people with collaborations, and I wish I could say it's always the same, but it's not. It's always different. So if I could ask, who have you collaborated with, and then were there differences between it? And if there weren't, how do you and these other authors, how do you do your collaborations? What's the back and forth look like?
So Aaron's really the only one that I've collaborated with. My book coming out through Death's Head is a semi collaboration, but not really. It's short stories, and we're kind of writing a few for a collection. But with Aaron, we've been friends for probably about a year now, and we were rooming together at the New Jersey Horror Convention, and we shared a table, and we were kind of talking about the 31 Days of Godless, and I had a book, Left to You was coming out in that, and Aaron had a story that was supposed to be coming out, and he's like, I really kind of like to make this longer. What do you think about, kind of adding to this and writing from a different point of view? And I'm like, why don't I take a minor character from your story and I'll write a story about that minor character, and then we can kind of have them mesh together at the end and meet up. And he's like, that's a great idea. So over a few adult beverages, we sat there and we talked this out, and we developed the characters and the story arc and the line that we wanted to go. And, if you've seen the cover of that, you have like this deranged looking bum sitting by a clothing donation bin, which represents both of our stories, because they obviously both have to do the donation bin, but my guy Garrison is that bum sitting there. And obviously, So Sorry, if you read the book, you'll be able to see obviously the correlation of the title and what sick things happen in there. So, but it was great work with Aaron. It was nice. We obviously we talk on the phone. We're friends before we were like co-writers. So it was a very organic thing where we just call each other up like, hey, I got this idea. I'm going to put it in here. I need you to write this in your story so I can line it up with this. And like, okay, I'll go back and change it. And so that worked out really well. But as for like writing a novel with someone with like an interconnected, one book, I haven't done that yet.
So also, this is another divergence that I just had. I was thinking about is short stories. and anthologies. Were you publishing any anthologies or releasing any short stories during this time that you were releasing these like novels and novellas?
Yeah, so I saw the open call for Gorefest from Evil Cookie, and I was like, man, I was a big fan of the Evil Cookie stuff before that. I think he had Brutality and Bludgeon Tools, and I'm friends with Dustin LaValle, so I was talking with him about it, and I'm like, man, I'd really like to get in this. I'm like, there's some really big name authors that are in here. I was like, I'm gonna write something for it. He's like, yeah, just go for it. So I ended up, that was the first bigger one I got into in 2021, and I wrote a story called Cut Around the Ass. And if for anybody that's a deer hunter out there, they know the significance of that. When you're field dressing an animal, you got to cut the ass out of it. So I was like, oh, that's a really catchy title. I was like, it'll give people a chuckle. I said, and then there's a story behind it. So I wrote that one and I submitted it, and then I started seeing like these bigger authors start saying, oh, I got accepted to this, and I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm not getting in. And then K-Trap sent me my acceptance the next day, and I was elated. Not so much open calls. I did take a few invite anthologies. Obviously, I submitted to Bloodbound for the Welcome to Splatter Club, and originally I think it was supposed to be hey, I love that story. I wrote that one. That wasn't even meant for anything. I think I just wrote that because I was like, I want to write more about Talia, and I did. So I was like, I'm going to throw this. And then when you guys had it up, I was like, I like Bloodbound books. So I like the stuff you guys put out. So I'm like, I'm going to send it to them. I was like, hopefully they don't shit on me, but I was like, I'm going to send it to them and see what happens. So I was happy. It's kind of like you guys are one of the publishers I really, really like and respect. So I'm very happy to get in there.
Thank you.
Candace Nola. Oh, no problem. It's my pleasure. Baker's Dozen I did with Candace Nola. She released that. And again, there's some really star-studded talent. I mean, Christine Morgan, Jeff Strand, Patrick C. Harrison, third, he's in there. And Between a Spider's Eye from Potter's Grove. River Dixon's a awesome guy, great publisher, great writer, just, a charitable guy, just an all-around good person. And he asked if I wanted to do a story. And that one I kind of went off the rails on. I wrote like almost a 10,000 word story. I'm like, here, this is like sprawling. I don't know if it's too much for you, but here you go. He's like, oh, I love it. It's gross and it's violent. And I'm like, all right, good. So he bought it. But I think those are the main ones that I did. Oh, and then obviously Splatterpunk magazine, issue 12, which is out now. Jack Bantry. That was the one too. Jack messaged me and is like, would you like to do something? And I was so nervous because I'm like, oh man, I'm like, I want to accept the invite, but I'm like, I hope I can live up to it because he's asking me. And I remember I messaged him and I'm like, all right, I'm done. I'm going to send it to you. I hope you like it. And he's like, yeah, I hope I like it too. And I'm like, oh shit, I hope he likes it. And he did. he luckily he did. And they ended up picking my story for the title image, which is that weird kind of creature ripping a person's fingers off.
Nice.
So Dan Hank did an amazing job at the art as always. So I'm very happy. I'm going to frame that thing when I get my first copy of it. So those are the short stories for the year.
I love the title of the story, by the way. Lost Girl Found Dog. It was really great. But I'm curious, was that before, since I'm looking back at it, that was before Talia you wrote it and sent it to us? Or did you already have Talia's origin story? Tell us how that kind of just connected, since we're all in that anthology together, actually.
Yeah. Talia is a really an interesting character. The first story, she pops up in a couple of my stories. The first one I did, and I don't think it's in print anymore, was called Sorry, What You're Looking For Cannot Be Found. And she was a bar owner, and she had, I'll say, a secret in the basement. And I wrote this character, Talia, and I'm like, I kind of like her. And when Billy Silver popped up, I'm like, I need a character. And I'm like, oh, I really like this name. I don't know why, but I was like, I really like this name and this character. So Lost Girl Found Dog, I did that after the Talia book was finished. And I'm like, I'd really like to do this again. I had this idea for this serial killer. And I'm like, you know what? I don't like this guy. Let him meet Talia. So.
Okay, very cool.
Awesome. I love when characters appear in like when characters appear in different works, even if it's just like a cameo. It's like what Quentin Tarantino does in his movies. I like that. I think it's fun.
I try to do that, and not that I'm like I'm a big Stephen King fan, so everything revolves on the Dark Tower. I have a Dark Tower a gunslinger tattoo on me. Like I love it, and I love the whole world building in that one universe. So I try to throw little things in there, like in the beginning of A Gift of Death, the opening scene with the girl Trina, who's there. She's there to see Shitfist, which is Billy Silver's band, and she's like, oh, I can't wait to see Billy Silver play, and just kind of connecting little things like that. And I have some more cameos that come here and there.
I like that. I think that makes it so people are also going to be compelled to read other books that you have. Like if they, they read Talia in one story, they're going to want to read her adventures through all of them. I think it's much more, I don't know, it's almost much more of a tease and compelling than just like, oh, I like this writer's style. It's like, no, I'm attached to this character and I want to see more of what this character does. And I want to see, and then when they start realizing there's all these commonalities, like, well, now I have to get all of them. I want to see how all this intersects,
Well, not only that, but it's almost like an inside joke. If you read everything and you're like, oh man, I remember that guy from this book, and he popped up over here, and you're like, oh, that's cool, and they kind of are in on it. So I like that interaction also with the readers.
Yeah, absolutely. So my next one is, what was next after Talia? Was that A Gift of Death?
Yep, A Gift of Death came after that.
Okay.
So that one, actually, I had the idea for this, and it's actually based on, there's a band, they're separated now, called I Wrestled a Bear Once, and they have a female lead singer. Yeah, listen to it. They have a song called The Gift of Death, and it's just loud, it's violent, and I think Courtney LaPlante, I think that's her name, and I love that song. I saw them live, and I'm like, man, this is so cool. So I've had this idea. I'm like, I really would like to write vampires, but I don't want fucking sparkly vampires. I was like, I want like 30 Days of Night vampires that are just, they're predators. So the idea just kind of came to me. And during my Christmas break, I had like 2 weeks off, and I ended up knocking out the whole thing in 2 weeks and just kind of let it sit. And it was fun. I think I did it justice with the vampire genre. And the sequel is going to be crazy. So I'm really happy for that one.
When's that coming?
That one right now is scheduled, I believe it's either going to be September or December of this year. So that should be, I'm almost done with that. I think I'm like halfway through it right now, and I'm getting to a scene I've been waiting to get to since I thought of it, and I'm very excited. I'm kind of letting it sit because I want to savor writing this scene because it's going to be a good one.
Not that speed is important, but I'm curious if, since we're talking about finding success in this, do you feel that always having the next project to work on and them kind of coming out relatively quick? I mean, to say you're starting in November of 2020 really with this release, and then now you've got this book coming out in 2022, has the succession being very quickly, has that been helpful in keeping the fire going and keeping the excitement up with fans?
I think so. I think it's a cultural thing right now that people are in the binge world. They want to binge things. Something comes out on Netflix and you're sitting down, you're watching it for 10 hours straight. And I think I'm finding more success with that 40,000 word novella because I can write them quickly. They're usually fairly easy to edit for people because there's not 120,000 words. People are in a crunch for time, so if they can sit there and they can read a book in a weekend, not only are they getting a complete story, but they're also getting that sense of accomplishment that they're able to read an entire book in a weekend. And it's also goes back to that, not everything is going to be gold. They might get something and they might read it and they're like, that wasn't the greatest, but I only wasted 2 days on it. Not when you read it and you're like, that's the end? You're like, are you kidding me? That's the end? I spent 1,300 pages to get to the end of this? So for right now, I feel like that novella length work is really doing well. You can still pack a whole story into it. You can leave it open-ended a little bit for follow-ups. The price point, again, we talk about, we're indie publishers. If I'm putting out something that's 150,000 words and I have to sell it for $25 on Amazon or $20 on Amazon, and I'm a fairly unknown author, you can go buy a brand new Stephen King hardcover for $25. Why are you going to buy my book? And then when you start talking signed copies, now you're talking increased postage, and you're talking, trying to make a profit on it and sell it. So, those $10.99, $12.99 books with a $2.99 to $3.99 ebook really are, kind of make people feel good and fiscally responsible. I know I do that. Like, I buy a shit ton of books from people, and I have stacks of them that I just buy and buy and buy because I'm like, oh, it's only a couple bucks, and I want to support my friends and keep it going.
That's kind of a little bit what we talked about with the platform on Godless and everything. And I think you've described me exactly. I kept like a decade-long vendetta, I think, against Stephen King because of an ending. And I finally was like, this is ridiculous. I'll just try something else. And I found I actually really like Richard Bachman's stuff. Maybe it's because it was so short and like powerful. And, I think the longest one I read of his was The Long Walk, and that still wasn't even all that long. And I really devoured it. But The Running Man and things like that are just...
Blaze.
Like
even Blaze. Like, I like Blaze. That was a good one. Thinner.
So those are, I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think that's interesting as well. Like, I think it's interesting because I hear people a lot talk about like diminishing attention spans and everything, and I don't necessarily think that that's true. I think that people just have this other option, and for me, like, it's I like what you were saying. I like the feeling of accomplishment because I'll have something and I'll be sitting there and I'll like, have one page done. Oh, I didn't make any progress. My bookmark moved like that much.
Yeah.
You can just tear through one and you have the satisfaction of a complete story as opposed to really waiting for it. I really like it. And I think that there's something to it. And I think the novella length is also it's simpler. They're going to have a more simple story than something that's a whole novel that requires more of the world building and backstories and complex plot lines. In novella, I mean, and a short story, shorter they are, the simpler they are. And I feel like you can just knock them out because they're going to be focused on fewer characters. And I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. And I'm glad that there's a way for people to really be churning more stuff out to almost like stay relevant without having to like cocoon yourself for 6 weeks and write a 100-page novel.
Yeah, it's the novella length, like you said, that sense of accomplishment, and just people, they just really, they enjoy it. It's something that, and for me as a writer, I don't mind the sprawling worlds and different aspects of it. But if I want to do something like that, I might break it down into 4 books.
Yeah.
Like a Gift of Death, the sequel, Black Hearts and Red Teeth, is literally the continuation. So you could literally take these 2 books and mash them together and make one whole, 90,000 word, 80,000 word book. But I knew this book was going to end here, and I stopped it there. So now the second book is literally takes place right in the very beginning, or the beginning of it is the end of the first book. So maybe one day I'll combine them all together.
Yeah, special edition hardcover.
Yeah,
sure.
Because there's probably going to be a third one the way the second one's going to end. But.
So after A Gift of Death, was the next one So Sorry?
The next one was So Sorry. Yep, that was with Aaron and I.
And was that? How did you guys publish that?
Aaron self-published it.
Oh, okay.
So essentially, we agreed on a price. I pretty much sold him my half, and then I was able to just buy I bought a ton of copies from him, and we had a really nice package deal we put together, and we sold them like that. And then he pretty much bought my half of the story, and then I just sell some copies from home.
Is it on Amazon?
Yep, it's on Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's only on Amazon, and then we obviously have copies on our own as well.
Very cool. And so how did that go? Were you seeing like a lot of crossover? Do you think you brought in new fans? Did Aaron bring in new fans?
Oh, absolutely. So Aaron has a bigger following than I do right now, and rightfully so. Aaron writes some great stuff. So it was definitely a help because he got a few more readers from me, and I definitely got some more readers from his people. And I think our readers are mainly the same. If you like his stuff, you're probably going to like my stuff. And I think that giving So Sorry to people was a good blend of both of our styles. If you could read his story and say, hey, you know what, I really like him, I'm going to contact him and get some of his books. And same for me. If they liked my portion, then I made a lot of new readers off that.
So after that, I know where it's going to bring us to Left to You, which to me seems like a major change from So Sorry in particular. So, and I know that you said that you had written that way before, but were you waiting? Did you think you were going to self-publish it? Like, what was the story of why you released all these other books in between?
That was honestly a financial thing because I knew that book was a lot longer. You know, it was in 70,000 words. I'm like, this is going to cost me some money to have this professionally edited. And I just really didn't have it at the time. And Billy Silver had just come out. So I was like, I don't know if I can really, if this is going to be a viable thing for me to write and sell books. And I'm like, I don't want to turn around and spend $1,500 on a book and a cover and editing and formatting to have it sit there and do nothing. So I was like, I'm going to sit on it. I'll tweak it a little bit. And maybe later on, if I start to get a little bit of a following, I'll self-publish it. And then Dawn came around with D&T Publishing, and I reached out to her. I'm like, hey, I have 2 of these books sitting here, A Gift of Death, and I just finished that. I was like, and this other book, I was like, if you're interested, I'd love for you to take a look. And she read them, and within like a week, she's like, I love them. I'll send you contracts right now. So I was like, oh, shit, okay, yeah, it's great. So I was like, oh, perfect. So that's kind of how that came about. That's why it ended up sitting for a while, and it was edited by Patrick C. Harrison III, and he's a rock star for an editor. He did a really good job on it, and was very, very happy with the final outcome. And obviously the cover, Don Noble crushed it. He did a great job with it. That cover is just eye-catching, and people say they see new things in it every time they look at it, and you're like, oh, what is that? Like, that's so cool. But yeah, it's a cool cover.
Yeah, and how did so were you concerned about like there being such a tone shift? And yeah, explain that.
Yeah, I told Dawn I was so nervous. I'm like, I don't think people are gonna hate this. I was like, I think this is gonna like not submarine my career because I didn't have much of a career to talk of, but I was like, people are used to me writing this violent and sexual and gross stuff, and I'm like, there's no sex in this. Like, there's violence, but it's not constant. I'm like, this is more of like an emotional book. And she's like, no, it's really good. People love it. And I'm like, oh, I hope so. I was like, I hope this doesn't suck. And now it's probably, I think I'm up to like 140 reviews on Amazon alone in just 2 months. So people have definitely been receptive to it.
Yeah, and do you think working with D&T has helped you expand your audience, or do you think this just like crossed over to more of like a more mainstream horror audience?
Yeah, I see. I always kind of laugh a little bit on like books of horror when people read Left to You and they're like, oh, it's my first book of his. I've really loved it. What should I read next? And I'm like, time out. I want to give you a disclaimer. I was like, this is like an anomaly. I was like, I might write something like this again. I said, but if you open Talia and you read the opening line of that book about strap-on dildos that are the size of fire extinguishers, you might need to step back and reevaluate your decisions. And then most people read the other stuff and they're like, oh no, I like it. It's still good. I'm like, all right, good. I don't want to get blasted. So,
do you think there'll be other genres then, since this was so well received? It sounds like you like horror the most, but do you have that desire maybe to jump into other stuff then?
I do, but I think if I'm going to do anything that's not horror based, I'll probably use a pen name. Just because I don't particularly care for when I read an author and I'm like, oh, this person's pure horror, and then I'm reading something and I'm like, this is like science fiction. Like, I was expecting to get blood and guts, and this is robots and lasers. So I think if I was going to do like straight fantasy or straight sci-fi or straight steampunk, I would probably make a pen name. I might let people know that it is me, almost like Nick Cutter. I don't know what his real name is. I forget. Craig Davidson, is that what it is? Maybe. But if I was going to do that, I would probably tell people like, hey, this is me, but if you see this name, it's fantasy or it's science fiction. So just try to maybe keep my audience around. So maybe they'll still support me because they like me, but also find a different audience that is going to want a different genre.
Would you see, and now I want to just jump this way a little bit, if you don't mind. I know you haven't done this yet. It's all hypothetical, but we actually got a question on that on one of our shows in the very beginning. What if you write in 2 almost very separate genres? How would an author do that? How would they brand themselves? And so I won't make you answer the whole thing, obviously, but would you grab maybe a different website? Would you do 2 different ones for, more of your horror Volpe and then more of your whatever your pen name is for sci-fi? Or would you have it almost all together with just different tabs on your website? Or have you even thought of that?
I would probably honestly make everything new for the other pen name, just because I don't want there to be confusion. I don't want people to come to like my newsletter and be like, what is this? There's fucking blood and guts. Like, I'm here for, sword and sorcery. I'm not here for, demons and stuff like that. So I probably would, but again, I would label it as such that, hey, this is my pen name, but this is my real name. This is what I also write. So that way they could still find it. I know Carver Pike does that. Carver has 3 pen names, one for his romance and one for kind of like he does horror, obviously, as Carver Pike. Then he has an MC. I think it's more of like a romance side, and I think that's CM Genovese, and he has Chris Genovese for like erotica. But people know that. They know that when they pick up a Carver Pike book, they're going into straight horror. Yeah, there's going to be some sex in it because he still, has that. But they know what they're getting themselves into.
That's extremely helpful.
Yeah. So speaking of Carver Pike, and can you talk about your podcast a little bit? When did that start? How did the 4 of you team up?
So myself, Aaron Beauregard, Carver Pike, and Roland Bursey Jr. have a podcast called Written in Red. And that was kind of Aaron came up with the idea, and he reached out to me last year, and we just kind of talked about the pitfalls of self-publishing and the stupid, wasteful things we did and how much money we spent on stupid things. Like, well, that was a waste. That didn't work out. And, I can't believe I tried this and that. And then we're like, we should like, share this with people so they don't do this stuff. Because if I had known, I probably wouldn't have done it. Although I was always the kid that had to touch the stove, so I probably still would have done it. But
we all do sometimes.
Yeah. So Roland's a great guy. He gave me a few audiobook codes, and I listened to his books. I'm like, I really like his books, and so I reached out to him, and we started like an organic friendship. And I just said, hey, I like your stuff. I appreciate you letting me take a listen. So Aaron and I decided we were going to bring him in as well. Like, hey, let's bring Roland in. He's self-published. He's got a really strong audiobook background. And Carver, we kind of had talked to as well. And he's like, if you guys are ever going to do guests, I'd really love to come on and talk, because he's strictly self-published. And we're like, why don't we just bring him on the show as well? Like, just bring him in. So the 4 of us decided we were gonna do this show, and we wanted it mainly to be like a self-publishing arc, and from the beginning to the end, how to write your story, how to get it published. And we came up with the name, we came up with the logo, and we paid obviously an artist to do the logo. And now we do it like bi-weekly. We do an episode usually every other Monday on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, all the major places. And it's been a blast. Like, we did a Halloween episode, which was just absolutely ludicrous. We did a Thanksgiving episode. We were eating like these disgusting jelly beans. Like, it was, there was no substance to it. It was just us answering like mailbag questions and eating stupid things. But it's fun. It's kind of just. Yeah, no, definitely not that. That's my girl Rain and her nastiness.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't really know what mukbang was, so now I'm just convinced it's
Yeah. But yeah, the show has been great. It's fun. We have a good time, and we learn a lot from each other. We learn a lot from the listeners that send stuff in. And probably one of the best parts about it is the emails we get that the show inspires people to pick up the pen and to sit back down and start writing again. And I'm like, that's really cool. Like, that we can make people, want to do that. Like, if you could see us 4 schlubs doing it, like, anybody can do it. We're like, just sit down and write. You can do it. Trust us. You can do it. So that's been really.
Would you say the show is it also for your readers, or is it more geared towards like authors in the genre then? Like, if someone's really loves reading, you and Beauregard and Roland, would they get, because I know sometimes if someone is watching this, we're very much geared towards just the authors. I don't think readers would get a lot out of this unless they were really love the behind the scenes. So I'm just curious for new listeners.
No, so it's actually Written in Red, the horror reader and writers podcast. So we really gear it towards everyone. So at the beginning of every episode, we have a set structure. We do our introductions. We talk about anything new we have coming out. Then we pick an indie horror author that we like, we admire, we enjoy their work, and we highlight them at the beginning of every show. We'll show their books. We talk about, what we've read. We usually we have copies of it. We'll hold it up. We'll tell you, people where they can reach them. So that's kind of on the reader aspect. Then we'll go into what the show arc is. So if it's editing, we'll talk about editing. So if you're not a writer, it might not interest you as much, but some people still enjoy it. And there's a lot of like lowbrow humor. Like we're very childish. There's a lot of disgusting jokes and profanity and whatever. It's fun. And then in the end of every show, we always have a reader recognition because we know that we'd be nothing without the readers. So we feel like it's important to give something back. So we always pick out a reader that usually the four of us have had interactions with, and we just give them like a personal thank you and, talk about them a little bit if they're fans of the show or just fans of the work. So it's kind of for everyone.
That's beautiful. That's, if I can, because I think I saw you post it. I had such a whirlwind of a weekend. I had a funeral, but I saw, speaking of fan tributes, one of our favorite readers, I think for all of us, Mr. Brad Tierney, has got some kind of anthology thing. I just barely see it. I'm like, holy smokes, they made one for the bearded one. And I was like, that's really cool. And this idea of recognizing fans seems like it's almost something new because now we actually get to meet all of our readers. It's not like a very random thing at a bookstore. We can see them all the time. So I think what you're doing with that show, now that you've explained the whole arc of it, that's a really great setup. Fantastic setup.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the Brad Nomicon. That was that was the brainchild. River Dixon reached out and he's like, hey, Brad is awesome. Brad Tierney, for anyone who doesn't know, is a freaking like OG splatterpunk horror reader. Like the guy breathes horror. And River reached out to us and he's like, hey, I'd really like to do just an anthology dedicated to Brad. And I'm like, I'm in 100%. I had a story that I had sitting for a while and I couldn't really find a place for it. I'm like, this is perfect. I'm gonna give it to River to publish for Brad. And speaking of Brad, when I read in the KillerCon convention last year, the virtual one, I entered the Gross Out contest with my delicious short story, Strawberry Shortcake. And Brad helped me a lot with that. Like I was kicking ideas to him back and forth.
Really?
So yeah, I was constantly texting him. I'm like, hey, open your email. I'm going to send you this. Tell me if it needs to be more gross. And he's like, make it more gross. So I'm like, all right, I'll make it more gross. So the final iteration of that story, I printed a copy at home. I signed it for him and I dedicated it to him. And I said, this is the only copy that I'm printing. Here you go, Brad. This one's for you. And I sent it to him. So he has it framed up on his wall if you ever see pictures of it. But I appreciate it. Like I said, the readers are the reason why I can do this, and we'd be nothing without them.
So you have that. You have the Brad Nomicon, right?
I think it's a Brad Necomicon. I don't know. I can't pronounce it. It's Brad Necomicon. I don't know. Brad
Necomicon.
Whatever. Yeah.
Necrobradicon. I have no idea, but Brad, we do love you. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So that one. What else do you have for 2022?
So my next book coming out is going to be in the beginning of March. That's called Only Psychos. That's coming out through D&T Publishing. That is pretty much a story. When I was a kid, we had a really bad snowstorm. I live in upstate New York, and we lost power. And my dad was at work. My mom was like, I don't know what to do. And my dad was like, take the kids. When there's a break in the storm, go to the hotel and wait out the storm there. So I have this idea forever. And I'm like, man, what if this hotel was just full of crazy people and there was all these people got forced into this hotel from the storm. So that kind of spawned that idea. So it's a single location, in this hotel, locked in with and it's fitting because it's really cold here in New York. We just got a bunch of snow. I have that coming out in March. I have my Death's Head release in May. I'm sure you guys have seen also I'm doing 3 chapbooks for Death's Head, or actually Dead Sky Inc.
I had a question about that. I'm still unclear on what a chapbook is, and I really think because things I found all said it was like poetry. So what is this iteration of a chapbook? So
what Dead Sky Inc. is doing is if you go on the Death's Head Press website and take a look at their products, you'll see they did one with Joe Lansdale not long ago. And pretty much what a chapbook is, it's kind of like I want to say it's about 4 by 6 inches. It's a small generally black and white printed, like kind of like the Splatterpunk magazine. That's pretty much a chapbook. It's that small, self-printed kind of thing. Generally contains one or two longer stories. So for mine, I'm doing 3. We'll call them roughly about novelette size stories for this. So they're going to be smaller, more than likely black and white printed. One story, just an easy kind of thing you can just stick in your pocket and go.
Very cool. But that's different than the Death Set, really.
Yes. I have a Death Set book coming out, and I have the chapbooks coming out as well.
Very cool. And that's 2022.
Oh, I have more. Oh yeah.
Wow.
So I have, that's like first half. That's first half of the year stuff. Second half of the year, I plan on writing. I'm hoping to get to my Talia sequel, hopefully, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to it or not. But I have another book coming out from D&T called Plastic Monsters. That'll be out in September. That's done. I already finished writing that. And then in December, Black Hearts and Red Teeth, the sequel to A Gift of Death. And then I may be done. I don't know. Maybe I'll throw some other stuff in there along the way, but we'll see.
Whoa.
That's a lot.
I'm impressed. Yeah, that is impressive. You're definitely one of those people, when we talked about the pros and cons of getting a publisher or not, you're someone who, it sounds like you're dedicated to spending time with fans and writing, and it makes a lot more sense to go with someone who can just keep publishing it for you and taking on that responsibility. I'm impressed though with your release schedule. I always wonder, do you ever feel like, you're welcome. But do you ever feel like, gosh, so you got the Splatter Club nomination, congratulations.
Thank
You're
you.
going to be like battling yourself, or do you not even care about that too much? Sometimes we think about the authors, if they got 3 or 4 books coming out and they're all in the same kind of genre, does it matter if, they're battling each other? Do you ever feel that you're battling against yourself with a release, either for sales or for an award?
No, I just have fun doing it. Like I never want it to be a job. I just enjoy writing, and I enjoy the reader reactions. When people tell me like, "Oh, Left to You made me cry," I'm like, I'm happy about that, because that means my fictional characters and the words that I put in there was able to elicit some kind of emotion from you. So if I could do it with every book, great. And I don't want it to ever be work. I want it to just be fun, and I put the books out for people to enjoy them. And if they like one more than the other, that's fine. Some of the books are more popular, and that's understandable. But it's just a good time. So I never feel like I'm in competition with myself or anyone else. I'm a big horror fan. Like, my bookshelf is stacked. I try to read as much as I can. So I'm always like everybody's cheerleader. Like, I want them to keep writing, because I want to read it.
Awesome.
Well,
all of that well said.
And I mean, that's basically all my questions. I think it's really, I think that kind of just tells a really good story about the necessity of putting out content, and it's really showing rather than telling. Like, you're not over there you're not doing self-promotion or spending a lot of time, creating the advertising and like this whole elaborate social media presence. You're putting in all the time to show people, hey, these are my books. This is what I have. And you're letting it go from there, which honestly, it really makes it sound like this is such a better use of authors' time, is to do what they love to do. Like, which is just writing and putting stuff out there.
Yeah, and the one thing I don't do, which I do see some people do, is I don't fight with people on social media, and I use that time to write instead of fighting with people, because that does nothing. I see people do that a lot, and I'm like, people are not going to read your stuff, or some people aren't going to read your stuff because you're fighting with people over nonsense. And I'm like, I'll just scroll right by, or I'll just keep writing. So that is one reason why I have so much time, because I don't get in social media fights.
So glad you said that. That's something I've talked behind the scenes with other people. It's just my friendly. I'm like, look, you might agree, you might disagree, but just don't. Why do you need to prove that you're right to all these people that you don't even know? And you're right. They really control you when you do that. You get in these hour-long tirades with people to fight, and all you've heard was yourself. You realize, I haven't written anything. I'm all worked up. And if you're emotionally worked up, you probably can't. Ideas aren't flowing. So that is fantastic advice too. That has a lot to do with when we're talking about growing up, the temperament of people. That's an important side to the writing business that we don't really discuss. It's not talked about. And you've already brought up your routine. You're a very structured person. And you know, you obviously have the self-control to not get in fights on the internet, and that shows you what kind of a person you are. And I really think I prefer to be around people like that are friendly to be around. It also sounds like you've had the most success with hanging out with friends, really. Aaron Beauregard and Roland Bursey, and they've all become your friends now, and Carver Pike. So it's really easy to collaborate with these people and be an agreeable person. That's awesome tips for success. Thank you so much, Daniel.
I don't want anybody to get this misconstrued. I am very, very childish, but I do not start internet fights. You can ask my wife and kids. Like, I'm childish. Don't get me wrong, but I'm very mature. But I won't start internet fights. That I won't do. So.
Childish humor we can accept, right?
Yeah,
That's all right. Oh, well, I appreciate it. Thank you again for joining us. This was fantastic.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah.
Much success.
And thank you for your continued support of the podcast and everything, and for sharing our episodes and everything. We're really happy when we do have people like you listening to us and saying that you are learning from the show. That's been some of the coolest things that I've seen.
Oh yeah.
When authors have said they made some Instagram image and they're like, look, I learned this from Horror Business.
I've been researching LLCs and business checking accounts and all this stuff. And I'm like contacting an attorney, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna see if I could set this up and get this situated, because as much fun as it is, I want to do this as a full-time profession at some point in the future. So why not start now with taking myself seriously and being serious about it and getting the proper channels and everything set up now? Why wait? So
awesome. Yeah, no, that is. So thank you. And that's what it's all about. You're fueling us, we're fueling you. So thank you again. And I do really want to thank you for being in Welcome to the Slaughter Club Volume 2, and Lucy, you as well, since that just came out, really. And it was great working with you guys both and talking tonight. So thank you again.
Appreciate it.
And I guess we'll see everyone on the next episode.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Guys.